Welcome back. You're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Blackboard on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Dr. Gladys Bergoni, the Chief Learning Officer for the U.S. Coast Guard, and Brian Burns, the Deputy CIO, also with the U.S. Coast Guard. Before break, we were talking a little bit about the platforms and the technology you guys are using. I want to continue that conversation, but I want to bring Brian back in around the technology piece. Brian, as COVID got started, as a lot of agencies moved to remote working, we've heard some great stories about going from 15% of the workforce to 60, 80, 90% of the workforce working remotely. Did that change the way the Coast Guard looked at IT modernization? And of course, when we talk about online learning, did that change the way you had to support online learning with different technology, different platforms and the like?
Yeah, yes, it did, to some degree. And let me explain this. We have, and going forward with the Coast Guard, we actually have three major priorities, strategic priorities. One is the maximizing readiness for today and tomorrow, which is looking at cultivating the mission readiness workforce, and then also modernizing our assets. And then also the other two are address the nation's complex maritime challenges and deliver the mission excellence. With that, the Commandant of the Coast Guard in the State of the Coast Guard address laid out the tech revolution plan, and there's 5 major areas in that. And that was cutter connectivity, C5I infrastructure, cyber readiness, cyber software, mobility and cloud, and data for decisions. With that plan, it was the overall broad area for modernizing where we're going. COVID hit roughly at the same time, or just right after that. So taking that plan, it made us accelerate a lot of what we were thinking of doing and moving forward. So for example, we had a pilot underway, which we talked about a couple of years ago, the VDI pilot. And we were supporting roughly 2,500 users for concurrent use at home in the Coast Guard. And you think about it, we have about 56,000 individuals. Overnight, we basically had to figure out a solution to go to about 70% of the workforce having to work from home. So we looked at that, and we looked at some cost performance issues and decided we're going to change our strategy a bit, and not necessarily where we're going to go, but in the technology that actually we're going to deploy. So we wound up changing in terms of VPN now is our primary remote capability, with VDI as the secondary way. We're reserving VDI for our reservists who may or may not have government furnished equipment. If they don't have it, they can go to VDI, get in, do their multi-factor authentication, and get into the network. With the VPN, this allowed us to do a couple things. So people were working remotely in cybersecurity, we still have to patch things well. We need to get people that have equipment that they can use. And so we wound up doing a couple things. First and foremost, we had increased the gateways. We had to do a 10-fold increase on just the gateway capability capacity, so we could handle the throughput that we're going to need. So we worked with this, and we got the circuits in, and we did all that. The other thing we had to do is we were still had a significant number of desktops, and we also had people that did have laptops, but usually left them at home. And there was a rule that said if you leave, sorry, not at home, that we left them at the work site, and to leave them on the work site so the patches would go overnight and go from there. Well, now we told people, and we evangelized this, please take your laptop home and use it at home. That then created the issue of, well, how do you patch? So VPN gave us the capability to have better patch management, and it gave us the capability to get these computers in people's hands as government furnished equipment, keeping the appropriate security around that, and getting them to work from home. That then required us to buy thousands of workstations real time to go out and deploy to the individuals. And we did that. And in that, we also set up a workstation integrated program team to think on how we're actually going to distribute this and tying the computers to the type of user set that we have and the type of teleworking that we're doing at this point, and coming up with what do you really need from a workstation endpoint standpoint. So we kind of settled on your traditional laptop, but as Gladys has mentioned, we have 2-in-1 laptops or devices now, and we're going more in that, trending in that direction. So that forced us to be a catalyst to move into the 2-in-1 world as we're going forward. The other thing we had to do, candidly, and we're using a tool today to do this session, but we had to look at what are the collaboration tools that we need to do. We're also beginning to start M365 and deploying the new email system, and we're looking at the collaboration tools there. That forced us also to accelerate the M365 deployment. So we are nearing the end of that in terms of email. But then we brought in two things. Working through DoD, as I mentioned, we're on the DoD network. We also then were recipients of the CBR Teams solution, which allowed us to do a significant amount of collaboration to DoD and other partners that we deal with. And then we had to get people up to speed on how to do that. So that was a huge thrust forward and quite frankly, opening the eyes of how you can do a lot of remote capability and still be a productive worker at home, because you actually can see the person and you can be connected and have the meetings that we just didn't have the capability before. Going back to security, that then brought up a different issue, and we're working through this too. And I don't want to get too geekish on this, but there's basically an impact level 2 and an impact level 5 capability. Impact 2 is more your traditional lower level security, where the impact 5 is more national security systems and so on. We have to support both of those. So we're now developing and have deployed the impact level 2 CVR, but we're also deploying an impact level 5 solution too, so we can move forward. So that pushed back to the tech revolution and the infrastructure modernization, the catalyst to do all this like right now instead of over a longer period of time. So just to sum it up real quick, we had to expand the gateways. We had to buy thousands of workstations. We had to put in the collaboration tools right away. We had to look at the security issues. We had to be able to turn on cameras and microphones, which were before completely locked down. But it also then opened up other applications that I mentioned earlier. We have a telehealth service that we now are deploying. We've had a lot of other remote tools, and back to Gladys, even the electronic learning and remote learning, we've actually pushed forward to do this. And it also accelerated our software as a service capability. So there's a lot that came out of COVID-19 in a very short period of time to be tied right back to our modernization, our tech revolution, but to do it in a much more rapid pace than we did before.
There's so much to dig out of that, and we will in a minute, but I want to just ask a little bit about the learning piece here. As you rolled all this out, did you have to kind of work with Gladys and her folks to ensure that, for instance, I'm sure that there's cybersecurity training and that every Coast Guardsman and women has to take. I'm sure there are some other compliance type of training, so many CPEs hours they have to get. Did you ensure that, did you talk to her about how, okay, make sure we have access to those courses, those items, so they can continue to move forward in their careers too?
Yes, and that was part of, and again, context of 2,500 users to the capability of supporting 40,000 users. Well, then the next question is, well, who's the first ones to get it, right? So we worked with Gladys to say, okay, how do we address the classroom issues? Because the classrooms were temporarily shut down, and we had to still continue to train people. So they became a top part of the top of the priority list in getting those workstations to them and making sure we get the connectivity, and then even accelerate, as I mentioned, some of the wireless capability that we put in. So we're also, that's another part of this, is we're piloting wireless capabilities in facilities now just to do that. So it helped us actually move forward in the direction that they had planned, that was a little bit further distant in terms of a scheduling standpoint, because now it was no kidding, they had to have it right now.
It's always interesting that a little bit of urgency, add that to the mix, and how quickly things can get done and done well, because you still need the security rigor, you still need the acquisition rigor, but all of a sudden people work in a different pace. These are great stories that I hear very common from a lot of different CIOs who have had very similar experiences. Gladys, tell me how it's been going on your end. Brian told us all the great things they're doing from an IT perspective. What about, is learning working? Are you finding that, I know you said you have some surveys out there, you're looking at those preliminary results, but what's your feedback you're hearing even anecdotally from people who are taking classes online now?
So Jason, what I would say is everybody, I'd say the vast majority of the people are saying that they really did not expect that they would enjoy this blended format as much. We do have some people that say, well, we miss that close interaction, that you have face to face. So we are looking at how do we make it even more. And one of the things that I know that you know, and you and our audience will appreciate is that blended learning, virtual training is really harder for our instructors because you really need, like, I think the research shows about every 4 minutes that you really need to engage that individual on the other end, right? Versus what's the double time, right? About 9 minutes when it's a face-to-face. So we are teaching people how do you infuse that throughout that learning, throughout that training. And another important thing I will say is that Brian mentioned it, but I just want to stamp it and say that it's probably even more difficult for us as a federal agency being in military service because we got to meet all those cyber requirements from DoD, and then DHS may have some additional ones. So how do we play in all of that? Makes it really, really tough for Brian. But again, they've kicked butt and this actually they've worked so well. And another point I would say is, believe it or not, we did not have Wi-Fi in our training centers, which should be like, duh, how could you not have that? We didn't really until just recently. So we are moving forward with Brian and his team's help. We're moving forward to be able to have that at every training center. We have 8 major training centers, and I'm happy to report that we're going to be able to do that, which will be fantastic because then that learner will be able to access information, right? Like I mentioned, whether our job aids, videos, right? 24/7 versus waiting to go to the actual classroom.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can finish up our conversation and learn about what you guys are looking at in the future as well. My guests today are Gladys Borgoni, the Chief Learning Officer at the U.S. Coast Guard, and Brian Burns, the Deputy CIO at the U.S. Coast Guard. I'm Jason Miller, and you're listening to Ask the CIO, sponsored by Blackboard on Federal News Network.